Every jurisdiction prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. Discrimination means any action or decision that mistreats a person or a group, or treats them less advantageously than others because of characteristics that are protected under human rights legislation. Disability is defined in different ways in each jurisdiction, but generally it means any condition of physical or mental impairment. This means disability includes both physical disabilities and mental disabilities, such as learning disabilities, anxiety, and depression, to name a few. Direct discrimination, like a rule that a company will not hire someone with a disability, is pretty uncommon. What is more common is indirect discrimination. This is where a requirement, qualification, or factor results in the exclusion of a group based on a protected characteristic. For example, a rule that everyone working in an office needs to be able to lift 50 pounds might indirectly discriminate against people with certain physical disabilities. To keep a rule like that, the employer must show that it is rationally connected to the job being done, that it was adopted in an honest and good faith belief that it was necessary, and that individuals cannot be accommodated within that rule. This is known as the bona fide occupational requirement test, often referred to with the acronym BFOR. The requirement to show that individuals cannot be accommodated within a particular rule or standard means that employers have a positive duty to accommodate individuals in the workplace. What does the duty to accommodate mean? It means that employers must adjust rules, policies, or practices to enable employees to receive equal treatment. There are two important boundaries to this. First, employees are entitled to reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation might not be the employee's preferred accommodation. So long as the measures taken meet the employee's needs, the employee is not entitled to their preferred way of being accommodated. Second, accommodation is to the point of undue hardship. This is defined slightly differently in different jurisdictions, but essentially means that the employer does not need to take measures that would cause financial, health and safety, or other hardship for the business. Undue hardship is an extremely high bar to reach and should not be considered until you have fully explored all accommodation options. The last piece of accommodation to understand is that the duty is broken into two parts: the procedural duty to accommodate and the substantive duty to accommodate. The procedural duty to accommodate means that the employer needs to start a dialogue with the employee, learn what their work-related needs are, gather any documentation as necessary, and consider accommodation options that might be available. The substantive duty to accommodate means that the employer actually puts accommodation measures in place, generally by agreeing to an accommodation plan with the employee and then acting on it. The plan is revisited and the accommodations adjusted as necessary, usually because either the employee's needs or the business operations have changed. Mental health. Remember, a disability under human rights legislation is generally any degree of impairment. This includes mental health conditions. The major takeaway I'd like you to get from today's webinar is that there is no difference between accommodating for physical and mental health conditions. When an employer is unaware of an employee's accommodation need, they are not required to accommodate. However, if circumstances provide reason to believe that an employee is having difficulty because of a possible disability-related need that are not being met, the employer's duty to inquire is triggered. The duty to inquire means that the employer needs to consider whether there is a relationship between the employee's performance and a possible disability. To be clear, it's not the employer's job to diagnose their employees. The duty to inquire means asking questions that can be uncomfortable, but the main purpose is to ensure employees are not unfairly punished or penalized when their conduct or their performance is linked to a protected characteristic under human rights legislation. For the employer, the duty to inquire is also a positive thing. Not only does it keep you in compliance with human rights legislation, but it also helps retain employee talent. If an employee is struggling because of a disability-related reason, accommodation can turn that struggling employee back into a productive member of your team. The duty to inquire doesn't stop after this initial meeting. The employee may not follow up on your suggestion to get medical advice, and their issues may continue. You may need to inquire again. Ultimately, however, accommodation is a two-way street. The employee is responsible for providing the information the employer needs to begin the accommodation process. Mental health conditions often make this part more difficult. For example, an employee who's experiencing a manic episode but has no diagnosis or understanding of what the episode is may present in such a way at work that the employer both has a duty to inquire and has a responsibility to act. You do not need a medical diagnosis, nor can the employer demand to know the medical diagnosis. What you need first is to understand how the employee's needs are going to affect their work so you can begin thinking about accommodations. Start by ensuring everyone is on the same page. If the employee gave permission for their doctor to contact you directly, the employee may not have seen all of the information that was provided to you. Ensure everyone understands what the medically confirmed needs are. Those will be the basis for any accommodations. Next, look at the employee's responsibilities and duties. Their supervisor can assist in drawing up a full list of tasks that may be affected. The most difficult part of the accommodation plan comes next. Drawing up accommodations that may meet the employee's needs while minimizing impact on their responsibilities or on others. Many employers choose to come to the meeting with the employee having already investigated several options. This can be an efficient course of action, since some options will require additional costs or other steps that will necessitate approval from someone else within the company. However, prepare for the employee to have comments or suggestions about their options. They can provide valuable feedback about how the accommodations will work in practice. Recall, though, that the employee is only entitled to reasonable accommodation, not to their preferred accommodation. Now, what happens when accommodation isn't enough to bridge the gap in performance? Employees who receive accommodation are not immune from progressive discipline for their conduct, performance issues, or things such as unexcused absences and lates. The employer is responsible for accommodating the employee to bring them up to an even playing field with their peers. Just as those peers can be disciplined or managed, employees who are receiving accommodations can be too. What is important is to ensure that discipline or performance management measures are not being applied because of the disability or because of the effects of that disability that are not being accommodated. Before applying progressive discipline or performance management tools, review the employee's accommodation plan and consider any changes that would ensure their needs are being met. If so, then the fact that the employee is receiving accommodation is not relevant to your analysis. However, bear in mind that the employee's needs can change, and particularly with mental health, episodic issues may contribute to employees' performance or misconduct. A robust, frequently reviewed accommodation plan will help protect you when you need to otherwise manage an employee with documented accommodation needs. Just like with the accommodation process, the approach to a medical leave of absence for everyone with a mental health issue is the same approach with physical health issues. Follow your ordinary procedures for requesting and approving medical leaves of absences, and note that any job-protected leaves for disability can encompass both physical and mental disabilities. Provide the employee with the same return to work support you would usually. While the specifics may be different, like moving the employee's lunch, for example, to allow for counseling appointment versus providing a closer parking space, the role and duty of the employer on return to work remains the same.